thank you everyone for joining us today on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and on Drisha Live. We ask that if you are with us here on Zoom, that you please accept the invitation to become a panelist so that you can share your video. So please do stay muted unless there is time for discussion, question and answer, etc. This is Jewish Ukraine through the eyes and words of Sholem Aleichem, a class with Ms. Dalia Wolfson, the final of 3 sessions we are holding to promote a sense of human connection with those in Ukraine. We ask that you please consider donating to efforts to provide direct relief. A link to a file with some organizations providing aid will be available in the chat. Before we begin, Rabbi Silber, the founder and dean of Drisha, will provide us with prayer and a brief moment of silence.
Okay, so thank you, Noah. We'll just begin with the recitation of a psalm, Psalm 142 in Hebrew and then in English. Maskil David biyoto b'amarat tefillah. Kolil Adonai Ezak, Kolil Adonai Etchanan. Shpoch lefanav sichi, sarati lefanav agid. Pitatef v'chai ruchi v'ata yadata netivati, v'yorach zu alech tamnu pachli. Habeit yamin rei v'ein li makir, avad manos mimeni in deresh l'nafshi. Za'akti elecha Adonai amarti ata machzi chelki b'eretz hachayim. Hakshiva rinati ki dalot miyod, hatzireni meirotfai ki amtzu mimeni. Hotzia mi masker nafshi lodot et shmecha biach tiru tzadikim ki tikmol olai. A maskil of David when he was in the cave, a prayer. I cry aloud to the Lord, I appeal to the Lord loudly for mercy. I pour out my complaints before God, I lay my trouble before God. When my spirit fails within me. You know my course, they have laid a trap in the path I walk. Look at my right and I see I have no friend. There is nowhere I can flee, no one cares about me. So I cry to you, O Lord, I say you are my refuge, all I have in the land of the living. Listen to my cry if I have been brought very low. Save me from my pursuers, they are too strong for me. Free me from prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous will glory in me for your gracious dealings with me. Okay, let's begin.
Okay, can I start?
Yep.
All right. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the listeners. Thank you for this invitation to speak. I'd like to start how I start every Yiddish class when I begin. So let me just draw up my slideshow here. Can you all see that? Yep. Good. And I'll ask you to unmute yourselves for a moment. Shalom Aleichem. Ich zog Shalom Aleichem. Ihr zogt Aleichem Shalom. Ich zog Shalom Aleichem. Ihr zogt Aleichem Shalom. Good. Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem Shalom.
Aleichem Shalom.
Sehr gut. Noch einmal. Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem Shalom.
Sehr schön, sehr schön. A dank, a sheinem dank. Good. You can go back to muting yourself. And I wanted to start with that. 1 second, sorry. I wanted to start with that both because it is part of Sholem Aleichem, the author's persona of being someone who's friendly and folksy. It's also, it's a traditional Jewish blessing of inviting, say, the angels into the Sabbath home. It's also a greeting in Yiddish for just someone you might meet on the street that you haven't seen in a long time, and it's also part of I think the wish of today, and I believe the wish of this series, which is for Shalom Aleichem, for peace to come, peace on those we meet. And it's also part of the conceptual question that I hope we'll be able to think about today, which is Shalom Aleichem is something that you might say to a Rebbe, just a Jew that you meet on the street. It might be, it's a greeting that you can say to someone who who you just met. It's also a greeting that you can say to someone who you haven't seen in a long time. So the question of what does it mean to feel familiarity, What does it mean to feel kinship? What does it take to greet someone? What does it take to extend greeting? What does it mean to feel belonging to someone? What does it mean to feel kinship to a place, to a land, to a people, sufficient to have us wish well and to have others wish well to us? So this sort of theme of Sholem Aleichem, both the author and the greeting, is something that I hope we'll have a chance to explore today. Great. What I'm going to is, I'd like to start with this map, and I will once again invite you to participate. Before we travel to Sholem Aleichem, Ukraine, I'd like to invite you to remember or list up the cities that you're thinking of today. You might be thinking of, there might be people in the audience who have family connections that you've known about from your grandparents or great-grandparents for years. Or maybe you've learned some of these names in the last 2 weeks. Whatever places are in your mind, I'd like to invite you to go to your view options, which would be on the top of your screen as you're seeing me share my screen. And there should be view options. And in those view options, you should have an opportunity to annotate. Does everyone see that option there? So if you go to that green bar on the top of your screen, it should say view options, and then there should be an annotate function that pops up in the menu. Yeah, great. Noah has it. So if there are places that you can use the stamp, or you can make draw something on this map, you can write on this map. And if you're not able to write, or if you'd like to participate in a different way, you could drop names of cities that you're thinking about in the chat. And if you'd like to elaborate on that with a word or two, I welcome that as well. Yeah, great. So it looks like we have Kyiv, we have Uman, we have Kharkiv, and they don't have to have names. You can put them wherever maybe you know that we may not know. Lviv. Great, and I'll leave another minute for that, and then we'll go on. Great. Oh, and Rachel Schwartzman says, I don't have the option to annotate on my computer, but thinking of Tarnopol and Zbaraj, where my father's family came from. Thank you, Rachel. Great, and I don't know whose grandma lived there, but someone's grandma lived near Lviv. Good, great. Great, thank you so much, everyone. And as I said earlier, we pray for peace in this land. Good, thank you. Great, so I think we'll go on, and I will unfortunately have to erase the drawings, but we will continue. So there are both, we are learning more and more names now because of the war that's going on. And we also have, as just demonstrated, names that we've absorbed from family, from history, from other sources of learning. And I wanted to present a couple more examples. Today we'll be talking about one lens through which the territory of Ukraine might be seen, and it's through a very particular lens, and that's the lens of Sholem Aleichem. So through the camera of Yiddish literature and through Sholem Aleichem's particular filter. But of course, there are many other ways that looking at this territory that we won't quite be touching upon today. One of them might be looking at this on this left is thank you to Eugene Wolfson, who's in the crowd today, who sent me a photo from the Historical Atlas of Hasidism. These are some of the major dynasties, including, you can't really see them on here, but I think this light green one is the Chernobyl dynasty. In the middle here, we have we have the Yiddish dialect. And on the right here, which is relevant to the historical conversation around places of Jewish settlement, is the Pale of Settlement, which was a region that included Ukraine, but also other lands that was established by Catherine II, formed in 1791 and designated for Jewish settlements, not in the main cities, but usually attached to smaller towns, but also forbidding them from completely living in total rural countryside. And we'll be talking about some of the contingencies and opportunities that came with where Jews could and couldn't live today. All right. Okay, and as we approach Sholem Aleichem, and I'm sorry, these are quite a few introductory words, but Sholem Aleichem himself was known for lengthy and flowery forewords. Are there shtetl names that you might know from Sholem Aleichem's literature? Please type them in the chat if so. And do you know where they might be located? If we were to look at this map and say, oh, well, you know, this Sholem Aleichem place, it must have been around here, around there. Where on this map might we find them? And maybe there are no answers. Yes, very good, Ilona. The fictional Kasrilevke, yeah. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on where that might be? Alrighty. Yeah, well, the Pale is sort of it is a long strip extending farther north, but yeah. Yeah. So Berdichev is actually we will get to that. I'm sorry, my mouse is being a little glitchy today. Oh, here it is. No, oh gosh, sorry. Yes, we will get to Berdichev as well, but Berdichev is actually more where Kasrilevke is on the other side, and Berdichev would have been Glupsk, would have been Mendelemach's province, Glupsk. I'm so sorry, I can't locate my mouse. Oh gosh, here we go. Sorry. Can you all see me and still see the screen?
We see tin house.
Did it? Do you see it now? Yep. Okay. All right. Good. So great. So we have Kasrilevke. We have a question about Berdichev, and that's what we will dive into in a moment. I'm so sorry about this glitch here. There we go. Okay, great. Can you all see it now? Yeah, okay. So now we'll get into it. A spazier, which means just like a walk with Rabinovich. So Rabinovich was the name of the author of Sholem Aleichem, Shalom Rabinovich, mapping Jewish Ukraine. And we have here a picture, a print made by Anatoly Lvovich Kaplan. Thank you again to Eugene Wilson for supplying this. And this was a frontispiece to Caviar the Milchike, volume of Caviar the Milkman, and it establishes something that we'll be talking about today, which is this distinction between the real and the fictional, in still a rather tricky way, where we have here on the left, we have Caviar, And then on the right, we have Sholem Aleichem. So we have the sort of fictional persona that Shalom Rabinovich built up. And he meets Tevye, and the Tevye monologues, it doesn't appear that way in the musical, but the Tevye monologues are written, they're addressed to a Sholem Aleichem who's coming and listening to them. So here we have this sort of encounter between the two. Tevye on the left, Sholem Aleichem, who's this sort of urban kind of dandy, right? He has a little hat, he has a cane, as contrasted to Tevye, who's dressed in a far more traditional way. This encounter that will allow us to both hear Tevye's voice in one way, but also understand that Sholem Aleichem is mediating or moderating, or he is both not Shalom Rabinovich, and he's a kind of modern Maskilic perspective on what we're about to be introduced to as the shtetl. And this perspective, great. Yeah, so this perspective is informed in part by scholarship on Yiddish literature, which talks about, including Dan Miron's very famous essay, The Image of the Shtetl, which talks about how the shtetl in Yiddish literature comes to be a sort of metaphor through which, a metaphor in this sort of very, very rich, imaginative space that it's not totally mimetic, right? It doesn't actually fully correspond to the reality of the shtetl. It can't claim to be a one-to-one reference point, these shtetls of Yiddish literature, for what these actual towns and villages were like, but rather it became a literary device for examining different themes and tensions of Jewish life at the time. Is the shtetl a total backwater somewhere in Eastern Europe, or is it a kind of Jerusalem? Is the Messiah coming? Is a massive destruction coming, or both? Is the shtetl dirty as the rainy mud roads, or is it as clean as a bathhouse? Is it the most stable and comforting and traditional place, or is it the most contingent and the most dynamic? So the shtetl becomes this sort of this ecosystem through which authors such as Sholem Aleichem can express their perspectives and their hopes and their disappointments with what is going on in their time. Here's a great biography of Sholem Aleichem, and a work by a favorite Drusha scholar as well, also examining this question of the shtetl and travel between the shtetls, among other things. Okay, and now we come actually to the place name that was raised earlier. So these fictional shtetls are not born with Sholem Aleichem. In general, these sort of fictional toponyms were part of European literature, and the same way that I described this literary device for the shtetl was used for other cities, other languages, for examining social issues through a fictional place that seems to match a real one. In Yiddish literature, some of the more famous ones before Sholem Aleichem came along were introduced by Mendel Mochesforim, himself a kind of persona of Shalom Abramovich, where Mendele, this book peddler, moves between different towns. One of them is called Glupsk, which, let me see, where's the chat? Does anyone have a translation for Glupsk that they would like to share? Or any shots on what Glupsk might mean? All right, yes, very good. Stupid bird, yes, or Fool's Town, very nice. Kopsansk, which means stingy, a town of misers. Tuniadivka, which the word Tuniadis is a parasite, so the town of parasites. So it's actually these very negative portrayals, and the shtetl becomes a site for the author to critique the backwardness of shtetl life, which is very typical of these sort of maskilim, or proponents of the Jewish Enlightenment. in the mid to late 19th century. Though not, this is not to say that there aren't nuances to those critiques anyway. So thinking about the image of the shtetl and how, so really Sholem Aleichem is not the first to do this. And Glupsk, which was supposed to sort of correspond to Berdichev, is one of those places, Kapsansk, Tunyadivka, and there are others. So Sholem Aleichem was not the first to be thinking about imaginary shtetls that way. What we're going to be doing today is looking at a couple of places through the eyes of Menachem Mendel, who is a character that Sholem Aleichem introduces in the he first begins publishing stories or these letters by Menachem Mendel in the 1890s. A collected volume is published in 1909, and he continues to revise these things as time goes on. So actually some of these city names change places as Sholem Aleichem edits them. But Menachem Mendel is this sort of what would be called a Luftmensch, a man made of air. He comes from Kasrilevke, and we think that, and although maybe he comes from a slightly different town, and he goes to Odessa, he goes to Yehupets, he goes as far off as London. He goes to many different places, and he's sort of his hat is full of tricks, and he's constantly the Luftmensch refers to the sort of he's sort of unmoored, and he doesn't have a stable business of any kind, and he keeps failing. And this is just a quote pulled from these letters. The Adventures of Menachem Mendel are a series of letters exchanged between Menachem Mendel, who's traveling, and his wife, Shana Shandel, who's very disappointed and frustrated with him. And he's telling her how he's going to try his hand at writing. And he says, and so I sat down and wrote a letter to the editor with my autogeography, how I played the market in Odessa and Yehupets, how I sold my soul for fool's gold, Londons and stocks and bonds and every horse I could bet on. Now I went from rags to riches and back again, 77 times a millionaire and 78 a beggar. So we'll be looking a little bit at this autogeography and how through Menachem Mendel, Sholem Aleichem gives us certain images of this territory. Great. I will pause very briefly on Pereyaslav, or a city that's referred to by, or a city that maps onto in Sholem Aleichem's imagination to something called Anatevka. Does anyone have any insights on why where this name might be coming from? And this, by the way, Pereyaslav is Sholem Aleichem's or Sholem Rabinovich's birthplace. He's born there in 1859, but most of his childhood will be spent in Kasrilevke, which we will be discussing shortly. Okay, so Anatevka is through Sholem Aleichem named after a Cossack leader who isn't good news for the Jews at all. But this is just one brief example and one beginning example of the ways that Sholem Aleichem plays with place names. So yes, and there was a question in the chat about what Kasrilevke means. So Kasrilevke is actually an interesting place name because it endows the city with a kind of splendor, right, or with a kind of crown. So already we see a slight attitude switch in Glupsk or Tunyadivka to something that might have, even if it's ironic, as Yiddish literature often is, there's something here of a more positive angle on the connotation of the name. Great. So let's have a look at some sources. Is the document with the source sheet available to everyone? Yep. Okay, great. So would anyone like to read for us from the beginning of number 2 on the source sheet? No takers. Okay, so I will read. Okay. So this is from a story called The Town of the Little People. The town of the little people into which I shall now take you, dear reader, is exactly in the middle of that blessed pail into which Jews have been packed as closely as herring in a barrel and told to increase and multiply. The name of the town is Kasrilevke. How did this name originate? I'll tell you. Among us Jews, poverty has many faces and many aspects. A poor man is an unlucky man. He is a pauper, a beggar, a schnorrer, a starveling, a tramp, or a plain failure. A different tone is used in speaking of each one, but all these names express human wretchedness. However, there is still another name, Kasril, or Kasrilik. That name is spoken in a different tone altogether, almost a bragging tone. For instance, oh, am I ever a Kasrilik? A Kasrilik is not just an ordinary pauper, a failure in life. On the contrary, he is a man who has not allowed poverty to degrade him. He laughs at it. He is poor but cheerful. That's how they are, all these little people. None of them are gloomy, none of them are worried little men of affairs, but on the contrary, they are known everywhere as jesters, storytellers, a cheerful, light-hearted breed of men. Poor but cheerful. It is hard to say what makes them so happy. Nothing, just sheer joy of living. Living? If you ask them, how do you live? They will answer with a shrug and a laugh. How do we live? Who knows? We live. A remarkable thing. Whenever you meet them, they are scurrying like rabbits, this one here, that one there. They never have time to stop. What are you hurrying for? What am I hurrying for? Well, it's like this. If we hurry, we think we might run into something, earn a few pennies, provide for the Sabbath. And I'll just skip over quickly to the part about, to the last paragraph. But it is of the old cemetery that the people of Kasrilevke are especially proud. This old cemetery, though it is overgrown with grass and with bushes and has practically no upright headstones, they still value as they might a treasure, a rare gem, a piece of wealth, and guard it like the apple of their eye. For this is not only the place where their ancestors lie, rabbis, men of piety, learned ones, scholars, and famous people, including the dead from the ancient massacres of Khmelnytsky's time, but also the only piece of land of which they are the masters, the only bit of earth they own where a blade of grass can sprout and a tree can grow and the air is fresh and one can breathe freely. Yes, great. So what, do you have any thoughts, and you can type it in the chat, or I'm happy to have folks unmute themselves, on what kind of shtetl is this place? What are its features? Do you see this as a positive or a negative depiction? Okay, so I'll say a few things. So a couple of things here. If the sort of, the Tunyadiska is a place of stinginess or miserliness, or Glupska is a place of foolishness, here there's something going on where the poverty is something that's, there is something a little bit optimistic to it, something that also goes along further in this work is there's a sense of shared responsibility, or you can be poor, but everyone's poor, and if you need something, you'll get it. So there is a kind of positive evaluation of that aspect of the shtetl. Here we also have so there is poverty, but there's also a sense of communal responsibility, and there's a sense of pride and some kind of like this shrug and a laugh. What we also have here is this curious detail about the cemetery, and I think, speaking to the themes of today, the cemetery is a place where one acknowledges history. So he talks about rabbis and scholars, learned men. So both of lived history, tragic histories, the Khmelnytsky massacres are mentioned. It's also the only place that Jews in the Pale where Jews weren't allowed to own land. They were able to manage land, and that was often the case for their occupations. They were managing land for Polish lords. But cemeteries were owned by the Jews of the village. So it is also a kind of, weirdly enough, and this is played out by many different Yiddish authors. It's sort of the only place that you own, and the place where that belongs to you. So a kind of site of ownership, or site of belonging, and a site of remembered history. Great, and Kasrilevke corresponds to the town of Voronkov, and I'll just show you here on this map. 1 second. You'll see that? Oops. So we had Pereyaslav, that's where Sholem Aleichem was born, and then Kasrilevke or Voronkov is far to the north of it. So we're moving northward. Good. All right, let's keep going. And next we will be moving to actually Odessa. So we moved for a second up north, and now we will be moving far down south. So Menachem Mendel, we'll now be looking at the letters of Menachem Mendel. So Menachem Mendel is freshly arrived in Odessa. It's all very exciting, and he's going to be writing to Shana Shandel about his time there. So now we're looking at source 3. Would anyone be interested in reading? Okay, going forward then. From Menachem Mendel in Odessa to his wife Shana Shandel in Kasrilevke. This is, source 3. To my wise, esteemed, and virtuous wife Shana Shandel, may you have a long life. First, rest assured that I am, praise God, in the best of health. God grant that we hear from each other only good and pleasing news. Amen. Secondly, words fail me in describing the grandeur and beauty of the city of Odessa, the fine character of its inhabitants, and the wonderful opportunities that exist here. Just imagine, I take my walking stick and venture out on Greek Street, as the place where Jews do business is called, and there are 20,000 different things to deal in. If I want wheat, there's wheat. If I feel like wool, there's wool. If I'm in the mood for bran, there's bran. Flour, salt, feathers, raisins, jute, herring, name it, and you have it in Odessa. I sounded out several possibilities, none of which were my cup of tea, and shopped along Greek Street until I hit on just the right thing. In a word, I'm dealing in London and not doing badly. Good. So I tell you, my dearest, the streets of Odessa are paved with gold. I don't regret for a moment having come here. But what am I doing in Odessa, you ask? When I was on my way to Kishinev, it seems God wanted to deal me in. Listen to what he does for a man. So immediately we're struck with this image of Menachem Mendel. He's overcome by all the commercial possibilities. As we said, he's a Luftmensch. He's very excited to go and deal in wheat and stocks and bonds and whatever other imports are possible. This is very typical for Odessa of the day. Odessa was established in 1794 by Catherine the Great after it was conquered from the Ottoman Empire. It was a free port city. It attracted many different nationalities. That's why you hear Greek Street. There were Greeks, there were Italians, and the Jewish population by 1897. And Menachem Mendel, these letters are beginning to be published in the 1890s. By 1897, there were 140,000 Jews, which was over 30% of the city's population lived there, and it was actually the second largest Jewish city, or the city with the second largest Jewish population in the Russian Empire after Warsaw. And the Jews there are dealing in various businesses, and Menachem Mendel sort of joins this business rage. So here we have a couple of pictures of Odessa. Here's a good sort of illustrative picture. You have your Jewish merchants who are sort of hobnobbing in Odessa, making their dealings. Let's see. Yes. So he's very excited, and I'm going to go to the PS now. As for where I'm lodging and eating, I can't rightly tell you myself. Odessa is a monstrous big city, and everything is very dear. The buildings are sky high, and you climb half an hour's worth of iron stairs to get to your room at the top of them. And the window is as tiny as a dungeon. It's a relief to get out and head for Greek Street, where I take my meals. That is where I grab what I can. Who has time to sit and eat when you have to keep your eyes on Berlin? So he's also, as someone who's coming from more open air, he's looking out at this urban landscape, and he's feeling a tiny bit claustrophobic in his lodgings. People eat grapes in the streets, not just once a year for Rosh Hashanah like Kasrilevkins. They're not at all embarrassed to do it. So he's in a deep bragging mode and very sort of excited about all these opportunities. And Shana Shandel writes back, and she says, and she's always writing back to him and always sort of criticizing him and telling him, I don't know what you're doing over there. You have children, remember your responsibilities. She writes, second, I'm having trouble with my teeth. I wish Odessa and its market had my toothache. It's killing me. So are the children, and his lordship couldn't care less. He lives in Odessa like God. This is a popular Yiddish phrase. Buys 17 pairs of shorts, bathes in the sea to music. What more could a body want? Well, you may go around in short pants and half shaven, but my mother would say you've outgrown your britches. So this sort of first outing of Menachem Mendel out into Odessa, here we see this sort of connection and comparison point between Kasrilevke and Odessa. So Menachem Mendel is sort of writing with these exuberant descriptions of the business opportunities, and Shana Shandel is trying to pull him back into her orbit by critiquing the sort of the values of Odessa, and also Menachem Mendel's own itinerant and unreliable behavior. Great. I think we will move on to our next study now. This is just a really great, this is an Eruv map of Odessa from 1894 that I wanted to share as a source. It's a really a precious sort of image. Okay, now let's go on to Yehupets. So Menachem Mendel is perpetually plagued by money problems, and he eventually leaves Odessa because of these problems, and goes on to Yehupets. Yehupets corresponds in Sholem Aleichem sort of geography to the city of Kyiv. So here we have some examples of what that might have looked like. Kyiv in the late 19th century, the Brodsky Choral Synagogue. That's all I have for, yes, images of that. Good. So I will read source number 4. So he continues to pursue business, but business isn't going so well. Secondly, I'll mention that in a second. Secondly, I'm through with investing. You can have it. It's no occupation for a Jew. It's made me old and gray before my time. I could write a book on all I've been through. Yehupets is in ruins. The market has gone bust. There isn't a ray of hope. The carnage, I'm sorry to say, is worse than it was in Odessa. Everyone is in the soup. Everyone is bankrupt, and so am I. Filing for bankruptcy is the latest fashion. So Menachem Mendel doesn't really encounter success in Kyiv, in Yehupets, quite the opposite, actually. And he also encounters the legal problems of living as a Jew in Kyiv, where residence for Jews was illegal. So he actually ends up spending the night oftentimes in the nearby town of Boiberek. I'm not supposed to be in Yehupets. Well, now and then the police show up at our boarding house to search for bad apples. We're always tipped off in advance by our landlady, and away we melt like salt in water. Some of us to Boiberek, some to Dimievka, and some to Slobodka. So he spends the night in Boiberek, and oftentimes he'll write about this as a way to avoid being caught by police. Great. Okay, I think I'll move on from here. So that's Yehupets and Odessa, and both of these places were ones where Sholem Aleichem himself encountered both opportunity and difficulty. So he first moved to Kyiv in the 1880s after marrying his wife Olga, who inherited, who had a large inheritance. So Sholem Aleichem himself was a big investor. He had all sorts of side businesses that he tried to pursue. But then after a stock market crash in 1890, he fled to escape debtors and ended up in Odessa. And he would move through different cities until 1905, when he fled Kyiv once again after the massive pogroms at that time. All right, so let's move on to Boyarka, possibly Boiberik, and Anatevka. Let's see. And I'll just show the map again to give a sense of the geography that we're looking at. So here we are, we went from Pereyaslav to Voronezh, then we went down, all the way down to Odessa over here. And now where we're going is to possibly the town of Boyarka, which is thought to be maybe the real place that Boiberik is supposed to be mimicking. And on the side here, we have something called the Anatevka Jewish Refugee Community, which I can speak about later if folks are interested, but is a case of, as one friend put it, art becoming life. In any event, so we're sort of on the outskirts of Kyiv, which is why Sholem Aleichem talks about spending the night there. Let me just share that again. Great. So what we'll do now is we'll read a couple of little excerpts from Tevye the Dairyman, and look at those and see maybe a little bit about what they're coming to represent in Sholem Aleichem's imagination. So any readers on this last round, on our last stop on the travels? Okay, good. So these are excerpts from these Tevye monologues, basically. Tevye strikes it rich. First, we bought a pair of horses and quickly sold them for a windfall. Then, with the profit, we opened a grocery store in Boiberik, sold out all the stock, and opened a dry goods store. After that, we invested in some woodland, found a buyer for it, and came out a few more rubles ahead. Next, we bought up the tax concession for Anatevka, farmed it out again, and with the income started a bank. But why buy a horse, I ask you, when we could just as well have bought a cow? We live close to Boiberik, which is where all the rich Yehupets Jews come to spend the summer in their dachas. And you know these Yehupets Jews, nothing's too good for them. One sort of interesting thing that you see here, I think, is, I mean, you see this throughout Sholem Aleichem sort of in the way that he builds his literature, but the towns are coming into contact more with one another. So you have Anatevka, you have Boiberik, you have Yehupets, and you have Tevye as someone who's presumably somewhere between Anatevka and Boiberik. He's not quite as it is portrayed in the musical that he's always in Anatevka. He's probably somewhere in between the two and moving and traveling and selling. So there's this ecosystem of, well, here we are in Boiberik. There are all the rich Yehupets Jews. What are the possibilities for me living in between these places with this sudden money that he's come into? Okay, and Tevye blows a small fortune. I talked about, so he's having a conversation with someone. I talked about everything under the sun, and he talked about Yehupets and Odessa, where he had been, as they say, through six. Oh, this is where he meets Menachem Mendel. So Sholem Aleichem will often have his characters, you know, they'll walk into each other's stories, and this is an interesting case. The Caviar Monologues where actually Menachem Mendel comes from somewhere, and he's coming from Yehupets and Odessa. So Tevye is talking to him. I talked about everything under the sun. He talked about Yehupets and Odessa, where he had been, as they say, through thick and thin, now on top of the world, and now in the pits, one day a prince, the next a pauper, and then a prince again, and once more without a shirt on his back. So it doesn't, it's unlike in there, unlike in what we were seeing earlier with maybe Glupsk, there is this sort of, there's the look of the traditional, more traditional Jew who's, as we know from Tevye's biography, he's sort of struggling with the problems of modernity. He's looking at his daughters and their pursuit of sort of individual freedoms and all the things that emancipation brings, but also looking at this Menachem Mendel, who's a product of, you know, the shtetl man trying to go out into the city, trying to make his fortune. And it's something of an ambivalent image of, well, look at this man, one day a prince, the next a pauper. How much has he really achieved in that city? And then the last little bit we'll look at is again this sort of this network of cities and Jews and their travels and their migrations, and how Sholem Aleichem brings them together through Tevye in the way that he looks out at Jewish history in this area. So this is from one of the last stories. Shprin said, God wanted to do us Jews a favor, and so he sent us a new catastrophe, a constitution. So there he sort of mispronounces constitution. Believe me, that's all we needed. You should see what a panic the rich Yehupets Jews are in, how they're all running abroad. That is to the baths in Germany to take care of their nerves. And what with everyone leaving Yehupets, you'd think, wouldn't you, that all the fresh air and green trees and dashes of Boiberek couldn't keep it from going to the dogs. Have we had a summer season here? They've come flocking to Boiberek from Odessa, from Rostov, from Yekaterinslav, from Mogilov, from Kishinev, thousands of Jews filthy with money. But why, you ask, are they all running here? For the same reason I tell you that we're all running there. It's an old Jewish custom to pick up and go elsewhere at the mention of a pogrom. So here, Sholem Aleichem through Tevye is playing witness to the upheavals of the pogroms that were happening from 1903 to 1906. These different cities of Jewish settlements that are being, these Jews that are being uprooted and they're moving from one place to another, and somehow, you know, they're all coming to Boiberek to seek shelter. And of course, Tevye himself would be moving out in a couple of years. And Sholem Aleichem, he flees Kyiv in 1905 and he moves to New York with his family in the 1910s. So, I think, yes, I'll pause here for a moment. These are very much excerpted bits. Sholem Aleichem, of course, wrote a lot, and these cities, I think, give us an opportunity to think about how Jews were creating opportunities for themselves, very both excited as Menachem Mendel was, and these Mescalim of the late 19th century were, you know, settling in places like Odessa and Kyiv, and putting out the great publications of Hebrew and Yiddish literature that we know today, and at the same time, obviously facing massive amounts of anti-Semitism. Sholem Aleichem's mapping, in a way, is one way of thinking about remembering the histories that Jews have had in those places, and thinking about the tensions that those sort of cataclysmic times brought of faith, modernity, and tradition, of moving from more rural areas to urban areas, and the promises and the dangers of that movement. Here, so I'll leave this open as a question, and I welcome responses in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourselves. What I've brought here are two images. One of them is a picture on the left. It's Sholem Aleichem zwischen zwei Welten, Kasrilevke in New York. So Sholem Aleichem moved to New York, and here we have this image of Kasrilevke on the right and New York on the left. And what does it mean for us? This movement of shtetls, both real and imagined, into the American context. And to what extent are these literary representations relevant today, and what do we look at when we remember that time in Jewish consciousness? What can Sholem Aleichem's perspective bring to it? And then the image on the right is one that I've taught this past week. Here you have Sholem Aleichem. This is in the Yiddish textbook called an Einem, and he's moving from Pereyaslav to Odessa. So a similar question of what do these migrations mean to us today? This is sort of literature connect us to a territory, and then how does or doesn't it feel relevant to the way that we think about the current events and tragedies in Ukraine? So those are sort of some open questions. I will give a moment for the chat or for folks to turn on their microphones if you'd like. And based on how much energy people have at the moment, I will share a little bit more on utopias and dystopias and different perceptions of what Jewish Ukraine, what the term Jewish Ukrainian could mean. Okay. Any thoughts or reactions? Yes, more Dalia content. Okay. So I think the last thing I'll share with you, I can see how much I can get through, but well, maybe I'll come to this in the end. So in 1918, an author named Kalman Zygmunt writes this sort of utopian novella called In der Zukunft statt Edenia. In Edenia, a city of the future. It's published in Kharkiv in Ukraine, and it depicts the vision of Kharkiv 25 years into the future. And it's sort of this crazy novella. It's obviously imbued with this sort of Soviet thinking of what the possibilities of that time could be, and it offers this vision of this like unique, futuristic, high-tech, multicultural Ukraine. I wanted to read this little excerpt from it. He's talking to someone who lives there, the protagonist, and he says, "Well, what do you mean by community?" And he says, "When I say community, I'm actually including all the other self-governing peoples. Here we live together so peacefully without any conflicts at all that you can't distinguish or separate them to the extent of saying the Jewish community or the Ukrainian one, which is the governing one." So this is this one piece, and it's in general a very curious artifact where there is a kind of imagining of what a future where sort of all nationalities play a part and are respected, what that might look like. And this comes from Soviet space and obviously goes very, very horribly wrong very soon after. But the question of what it might mean to in general, the role of imagination in conceiving of possible visions of coexistence or of mutual respect is a powerful one. And there's actually a very moving passage in this piece as well, where he imagines, just see one second, where the protagonist walks through the city of Edenia, and there's a Sholem Aleichem street obviously there, and he sees, let's see, where is it? He sees this statue of Sholem Aleichem. So right in the middle of the little garden of flowers and other greenery stood the figure of Sholem Aleichem. Even before he got close, it seemed to Kinderschman that this was Sholem Aleichem in the flesh, whom he had once heard as a child long, long ago. On one on the right, so he's looking at it. There are all of these bas-reliefs. On the right was titled as a stock exchange in Anatevka. It depicted a group of Jewish brokers in a cafe, wheeling and dealing, and there, more striking than all the rest, was Menachem Mendel with his wrinkled Sabbath hat, black goatee, and walking stick. His pose was one of a spirited one-upmanship. He felt as if he were there in one of those vibrant stock exchanges during the war when the man whose memorial he was standing next to was still alive. And then he sees Tavia's daughters. More striking than either of these is the third gilded bas-relief Jewish children. Amongst this group of children, each with its own smile, its own expression, wandering around the field below were Methuselah the Jewish horse, Rabchik the puppy, and many the calf. Zalman Kinderschman couldn't get enough of looking at the bas-reliefs where nearly all of Sholem Aleichem's creatures were represented carved into the stone. So I think there's something quite interesting in this inclusion of Sholem Aleichem, who was he died in 1916. So this was published in 1918. So by then, Sholem Aleichem was really very much a revered and well-known figure. 250,000 people showed up to his funeral. And here, sort of Sholem Aleichem becomes a monument, and his work is celebrated in this strange, envisioned, utopian Jewish Ukrainian city that is allowed to exist within this author's imagination. So this is just this question of how Sholem Aleichem creates an opportunity, perhaps, for thinking about Jewish, both the precarity and the opportunity of Jewish belonging in the space of Ukraine. And I think I will finish there. So I hope this has been a sort of invitation to thinking about Jewish memory and Jewish consciousness in Ukraine through the lens of Sholem Aleichem. There are many other authors that we could have chosen, and ultimately, I hope it's been a sort of, through the mapping exercise and through thinking about moments of connection, an opportunity to think of those cities actively and to wish for Shalom soon in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolfson. As this is the last session in our Ukraine series, Rabbi Silber would like to take us out a little bit differently. We understand that everyone has time commitments, so if you need to leave, feel free, but if you would like to stay, Rabbi Silber, would you?
Okay, so just thank you very much. I think we had a picture, somewhat of a picture of life for the Jews, both the certain kind of optimism and also a sense of reality. The richest place is the cemetery. It's very rich, and hopefully there'll be enough room, except if there's another pogrom and that kind of thing, which, the idea of this shtetl as this Edenic place, of course, is far removed from any kind of reality. On the other hand, there's a great warmth there, and I got a sense of sort of the average person there is someone trying to make it in this world, trying to survive, given the fact that there are forces beyond our control. I just thought a good way to end would be with a song, and I was thinking of a nigun which was written for Mizmor David. Actually, it was called the Song of the Homeless. It was written by the first Mudgitzer Rebbe. The Mudgitzers have an amazing musical tradition, and the first Rebbe, Yisrael Taub, was in Mudgitz, which is on the border, near the border of Poland. In the First World War, the Jews in what they called the fortified cities were told they have to leave the cities. They were probably thought of as potential spies for Germany or whatever. And the Jews simply had to leave the towns and were forced into exile. Amongst them was the Rebbe of Mudgitz, and he went to a place called Radom, where he met thousands and thousands of Polish Jews who had been uprooted. And in response to that, he wrote a nigun, which was sung for Mizmor David. I remember many years ago, we used to, on the Shabbos table, we would sing nigunim My father would read nigunim, beautiful voice, and we were singing this particular nigun when our next door neighbor, Mr. Orenstein, walked in. He was a survivor, and he was very struck. He wasn't a person who said much, but he was singing this. He said, we sang that in the ghetto. He was in Lodz and he was in Warsaw, I think Auschwitz, and was a good part of his family, but he was very taken by this nigun. And it was apparently was a very well-known nigun in Europe. It has 6 parts to it. It's about 5 minutes long. So for Noah, you can play a recording of it. It's sung by Ben-Zion Shenker, the great representative secretary of the Second Majid Rebbe, Mizmor David, or the Song of the Homeless, which I think is appropriate for our time. Thank you all for participating.
David Hashem Roi Hashem Roi
Thank you for participating. Sholem Aleichem. Hope for better times. Thank you.